Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Publishing Now 2024 Using Technology to Navigate Changes in Publishing webinar. My name is Nicole Tomasi, and I'm the Marketing and Conference Manager for Westchester Publishing Services. And we're pleased to co-host this session again with our friends and colleagues at Publishers Weekly, along with the panelists. As the remainder of the attendees are getting signed in, I will just go through a few general items before I turn things over to the moderator and panelists. So just as part of that housekeeping before we get going, your microphones are going to be muted through the entire presentation. However, you're welcome to enter questions in for anyone at the panel at any time during the presentation using the Q&A box that's in your control bar at the bottom of the screen. We did receive a number of questions during the registration process, and we will try to address those first, and then any additional questions that come in during the session as time allows. For those of you who are not familiar with Westchester Publishing Services, we are a U.S. employee-owned company that was founded in 1969. And today we have offices in the U.S. as well as in the United Kingdom and wholly owned production facilities in India. Through these offices, we serve more than 600 publishers worldwide who rely on Westchester for our high-quality editorial, production, and digital conversion services on more than 16,000 publications each year. Furthermore, our education division, which is based in Dayton, Ohio, provides services as far upstream as content development to support educational content providers and edtech companies with their requirements. And with that, I am pleased to introduce your moderator for today's webinar, who is Jim Milliot, Editor-at-Large for Publishers Weekly. Jim?
Thanks, Nicole. Nice to be back with everybody for a Westchester webinar. I've been moderating these since we started, and I always find them educational. So I'm going to do a quick business update on where things stand now in 2024. And then I'll introduce all three of our speakers in order. And then I'll turn it over to them to let them carry the day. After they speak for about 5 or 10 minutes each, I'll probably start with some questions that we were pre-sent in, and then we'll turn it over to everybody else. So as soon as you have an idea for a question, just pop it into the Q&A, and we'll take it from there. So, so where are we in, May 2nd, 2024? Well, looking at book scan numbers for the first quarter, sales were down about 2%. And the pattern's been a familiar one. Fiction sales are up and nonfiction is down. And one thing that was a little bit different, it seems like frontlist was gaining a little bit of traction, although backlist sales were still dominating. It's hard to think of how sales are going to play out over the course of the rest of the year. I think the general consensus is it could be down a little bit again. Unit sales for book scan in 2023 were down about 2.5%. Now they're trending down about 2%. So reasonable to expect that maybe that trend will continue. One thing that people keep saying, and we were just discussing that we're not going to say this anymore, first quarter sales this year were still ahead of 2019. But the problem with that is nobody ever really says that the follow-up to that is that expenses are up over the 2019. So the bottom line is, pressure on margins continues. And that's one of the things I think we're going to address here, and seeing how technology can help everybody operate more efficiently. The BIS general meeting was a couple of weeks ago. Some of you, I'm sure, were probably there. And there was a lot of talk about that. It looks like the industry could be back into its traditional flat growth mode, and that one year sales may be up a little, some years sales will be down a little bit. And so, taking that into consideration, Brian O'Leary, who's the executive director over there, was pointing out that sales of rights, will play likely a more important part in publishers' business models going forward. And he was suggesting that, new tools could be on the horizon to help people sell and quantify their rights processes. So hopefully, I think we'll address something along those lines. And Brian also mentioned that as much as the supply chain has improved over the last years of difficulties during the pandemic, he thinks that the supply chain is about at its limits. So he's looking for more cooperation, more communication throughout the supply chain. Again, I think we'll hear some ideas on how that may best be handled. So that's enough for me. Um, I will introduce our speakers now, and like I said, once they start going, we're going to move from one to another. And thank you, Nicole. That's the order we're going to be giving it in. So Kelly Gallagher will be first up. Kelly is VP of Content Acquisition at Ingram, and he manages published relations for North America, which includes Lightning Source print-on-demand services, as well as Core Source digital asset management and distribution. Prior to joining Ingram, he worked at Balco for 6 years, was a publisher for 10, and has been on the boards of BISG and IPBA. Next, we'll hear from Keith Riegert. Keith is the CEO of Ulysses Press and Velpro's Books and the publishing platform Perfect Bound, which I know we're going to hear something about. Keith teaches analytics and consumer insights at NYU, sits on the board of advisors of NYU Publishing, and he holds a BA in English from the University of California, Santa Barbara, an MBA in analytics and marketing from NYU Stern of Business. And the third spot is Tyrrell Mahoney. She became president of Chronicle Books in January 2017. She had been VP of Sales, Marketing, and Business Development there. She joined Chronicle in 1996 as International Sales and Marketing Associate. Before that, she was a circulation manager at Mother Jones magazine. So interesting hearing about that as well. So without further ado, Kelly, the floor is yours.
All right. Good morning and good afternoon, and maybe good evening to everyone. Just want to make sure we're looking okay. Looks like my camera's on. I can see Jim. What I thought I would do to start out our panel is to share just a quick overview of what Ingram is up to in the technology space. But then also to maybe lay out some broader definitions as we talk about technology. There's a lot of conversation right now about Gen AI and what all is going on in that space. However, there's so much more to technology than we know. And if I can just get a nod of the head, is my screen showing okay? Great. Okay. Go in presentation mode. So, before I talk about Ingram, just a general comment about our industry that we live in today. And, it has always been this push-pull, this struggle between the art and science of publishing. And, for many technologies, when they're introduced, have had a scary effect or a push effect to, distrust and or not necessarily believe that they're going to be transformative, going probably all the way back to the first printing press, to ebooks, to now Gen AI and other forms of technology. And so I think it's important that we just recognize, the role of technology in publishing has to augment and improve the process, not necessarily supplant or replace, because the gut still works. An editor knowing how to make a book better will never, I believe, be replaced. An acquisitions agent who has a hunch on a particular new writer is going to be, I don't know that the machine will ever replace that, but there are things in technology that we just have to, I think, better embrace, especially now when margins are thinner, when there's more competition globally. And so our use of embracing technology and seeing what we can do to harness it is, I think, really essential that we always take a look at. In essence, we should always be asking ourselves, how do we solve for pain and make technology work for us such that we can sell more books to the consumers that want to buy them? And so for us at Ingram, this has always been an exercise in what we would call cost leadership. How do we find ways to increase revenue with technology, and how do we find ways to become more efficient? So I'm going to give some definitions and then talk about how Ingram is utilizing some of this technology. Human augmentation. So that's a fancy phrase of what are we doing today that we can reduce labor costs and or become more efficient in the businesses that we run today. We all know coming out of COVID and in COVID, you know, for those that are involved in warehousing or printing as an example, the labor costs have gone up significantly, 25% since 2019. Some Bureau statistics will say, and then just trying to find the labor is really a challenge. And so for Ingram, this has been a major focal point for us, is how do we automate through technology our warehousing processes? And so we're involved in a very comprehensive effort. Some of you that may be on the call today have come and visited our plants recently just to see what we're doing. And so I thought I'd play a quick video to show one of the ways that really making a difference in fulfilling tens of thousands of orders every week. Is literally have a small army that would go and have to pick books off of shelves every day. So you're looking at other industries' technologies and saying, how do you implement that in the book publishing side? And this is a great example. Those are not windows, they're not vacuuming the floor, they're actually bringing goods to workers versus workers going to the goods. And that's helped us to reduce our labor costs substantially while being much more efficient in getting books to the bookstores that we serve. That's big, cool technology, but I would say human augmentation also takes the form of what we can do to just be more efficient in other areas like pre-media. Our conversion processes that we're now working on in conjunction with Westchester actually are looking at processes that used to really involve a lot of labor, and thereby where publishers would pass on the opportunity. Large print is a great example. We're now working with Westchester to automate and streamline and greatly reduce the cost to convert traditional trade books into large print, such that there's no reason not to have a large print edition for any book that's out there, especially when you put it into print on demand where you're not carrying any inventory. I think that's a real practical use of technology. Same thing with hardcovers. We would say, you know, there's no reason why a book can't live in hardcover in perpetuity. We can convert it easily and keep it in a virtual position. So human augmentation, what are we able to do to reduce costs out of the friction? Big data, machine learning, you know, before the Gen AI conversation 2 or 3, 4 years ago, big data was all the rage. What are you doing with big data? I would say this is probably the one area that is most often overlooked in our industry. We have a lot of data. We tend to rely on a very thin slice of POS data to run our businesses. I think we're really missing the point here in how we can really harness big data and machine learning to do things better and more efficiently. At Ingram, you know, one of the things we've got to be cautious of, especially with more and more content flooding the market, is how we can detect bad actor accounts. And so we use a lot of big data in validating and vetting all of the new accounts that come in through our Ingram Spark service, which is an author servicing program second only to Kindle, ensuring that we protect the good IP and keep the bad IP out, a big area that we focus on. Things like metadata enhancement, inventory and print costing solutions. Again, as margins get thinner, we've got to find better ways for discovery. So what are you doing to actually let machines tell you how best to sell books with keyword refreshes, those kinds of things. And then on inventory and cost solutions, you know, we tended to only look at, in this industry at, you know, what is the cost per unit to print? That is really not the way I would contend that this industry has to look at how we sell books and where we put our price points. We've got to look at the total landed cost, factoring in inventory, factoring in waste, et cetera. And so big data can work with that. We've built some really cool tools that we're now working with publishers to help them really understand what the real opportunities are there. When you get a little deeper, not quite to Gen AI, but adaptive analytics, that's another, I think, big area that the industry could benefit from. And for us, the biggest area that we find value in is what we're using for wholesale order forecasting. We made a significant investment about 6 years ago on a very sophisticated forecast model that allows us to buy more just in time from publishers and really factor many more things. When you've got a continuously changing model, you need adaptive analytics that are going to be able to do that. We're also now utilizing this also, again, with more content coming into the market for looking at actual book IP infringement detection, which again is a really important process. Finally, on the leading edge, there are so many new emerging technologies that we just need to get a higher IQ on. Certainly, and we're not going to cover, I don't think, in too much detail Gen AI. There's plenty of other conferences on that. But for us, it's less about what's being created from a content perspective for Gen AI, but just becoming much more efficient with what we can use through whether it's Microsoft Office efficiencies, metadata creation, translation, IP infringement, et cetera. And then other areas on the digital side, blockchain has been around, it's been talked about. We've really not taken advantage of that. We think there's some real opportunities there. I think maybe some others will talk about. And even just how we become more efficient in 3D manufacturing and printing. So that's my quick spiel, Jim, on our take on technology. I'll let you turn it over to the next participant.
Okay, Keith, your turn.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Keith Riegert. I'm the CEO of Ulysses Press and Perfect Bound, and I thought that I would take this opportunity to approach technology from the small independent publisher side. So the side that doesn't have any money to spend on technology. We look at a lot of technology options at Ulysses Press. We are a data-driven publishing company, so we do a lot of research into the areas that we're going to publish into. We want to know that an established market exists for the book before we bet $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 in producing it. So we look at new technology options in 4 different buckets. The first is how to sell books. So this is really marketing optimization, and we're looking for low cost or no cost tools like Seller App, which is an Amazon tool where you can look up keywords, you can do reverse ASIN searches of keywords and really understand how to position your metadata online a lot better. Moz is another one that is very affordable for doing SEO research, general insights into markets outside of Amazon. And I will put all of this into the chat in just a minute. And then we use platforms like Amazon's Vendor Central to do demographics research, understand a little bit more who is buying our book. And that, those all are very low cost options for increasing your data game. The next bucket that we have is increasing productivity. So the first thing that I did when I came back to Ulysses Press was got us all onto Google Workspace, which is a really great tool for bringing your entire publishing company together, being able to host your email as well as all of your files in one very safe place and not have to worry about IT security. Another one that we use a lot is AI. I encourage our staff to try to use AI for everything that they do, whether that is drafting an email or writing a press release or brainstorming titles. I think that it allows you to dramatically increase your productivity. And the key there is just to take little nuggets from the answers that you're getting. And then the last piece for increasing productivity is just data management, being able to store your data in SQL, use Python to put different data sets together. And I'll talk a little bit more about that with reducing costs. Building awareness for our titles is another big one that we are always actively looking at new tech solutions for. So whether that is, newsletter platforms or social media aggregation platforms like MailChimp and some of the other tools, I'm blanking on their names. And then the last one is reducing costs. So this is a huge area for us. One of the most challenging things, I think, for small independent publishers is to really understand what their margins are. And one of the beautiful things about publishing is we have this relational database that is already built into our industry. And that is because we have the ISBN 13, which is completely unique to every title, and we treat that as the primary key in all of our relational databases. So you can put your sales figures from your distributor and your cost of goods from your print runs all together by putting everything into a relational database and merging those data sets on the ISBN 13, which is very effective. And then the other area that we've really been pushing to reduce costs is with our printing. So we did build Perfect Bound about 2 years ago and have been using it for the last year. And it's a two-sided marketplace that puts independent publishers and printers together and allows them to work together and allows publishers to get bids on all of their print runs. So our focus is really to try to find tools that aren't going to cost an arm and a leg and put them to use to improve the publishing process at Ulysses. I think the future of publishing is looking like it's going to be lean and agile, and anything that we can do to facilitate that within our organization is where we're going to put all of our emphasis.
Okay, great. Okay, Tyrrell, that's your vantage point.
Thanks. So Chronicle Books, just quickly to frame it out for the folks on this webinar. We are a mid-sized publisher, about 250 employees, inclusive of subsidiaries and all of our imprints. Our relationship with technology and how we approach introductions of new tools and new ways of enhancing our business is kind of, we're less nimble than smaller publishers out there, and yet we also don't have vast amounts of resources to continue to invest. However, over the last few years, and in particular with during the pandemic, we did expedite some of the projects that we had been hoping to do that are related to new technologies and new tools. So a couple things I wanted to highlight today is more on the sales management and forecasting side, demand planning. One of the kind of longer tools that we've been using, we introduced a Salesforce platform for our sales management in late 2018, which has been an important framework for sales management and forecasting. I'm not sure if many of the publishers our size or smaller has been using a CRM system, but it was something that was really critical for us, and it is still a work in progress, meaning we still have so much more we can leverage through that system, but it has allowed us to better manage our outreach, set goals, and manage or monitor deliverables and progress on initiatives. And it's really been a great way to also develop lead generation and work at closing those leads into retailers who are carrying our publishing and that of our clients. So that's been over 5 years now, 6 years almost, and we are really beginning to see the results of that. So that's good to kind of think about a timeline in relationship to a tool that, you know, is a fairly robust potential platform, starting small and building out of that. You want to create adoption, which was probably one of the hardest parts of this, is how do we get everybody really using this, and then the continuity of that usage while continuing to expand the additives that a tool like that can bring. Amazon is obviously an account or market channel, however you want to reference it or describe it, is something we're all working on trying to improve our business, how we surface our titles, how we enable people to discover our books and publishing on the site. And one of the things we started, I think about 4 years ago, was working with iObite and their market view tool. And I don't know how many folks out here are using that particular platform, but this is a web-based platform that allows us to see all aspects of our Amazon results, inclusive of the sales by title, but also all of the back end, continually monitor the buy sacks and where we might be able to enhance. So we're doing the data work separately, but we're able to really analyze the results through Market View. And it's all in one place, and it's easily searchable. We use it across our publishing group side to our marketing team, and also obviously the Amazon management team. We can monitor the results of our marketing endeavors. We have a tour. We can add that information into Market View and actually try and track the impact of those endeavors. So that has been a pretty useful and extremely robust tool that we are continually working with the folks at iObite to enhance and find additive ways we want to look at the business. And now we have a much longer history of sales in that tool that we can also draw from. One of the other things that I thought might be useful for folks on this webinar is hearing about the B2B site that we launched also during COVID. This was something we wanted to do, which was a wholesaler site where our retailers could actually order directly and see all the publishing and that of our clients via a web-based platform. So we were able to leverage our D2C Shopify website. We built out the B2B side, and that has actually proven to be extremely valuable to drive our sales, get closer engagement with all of our independent accounts, of which we have many thousands, both bookstores and specialty stores of all types. This allows us to do very targeted email marketing outreach to our customers, to feature Mother's Day opportunities and all the new publishing or backlist publishing that we want to feature. We're able to allow or give our retailers the ability to order when they can and when they have time, which is often late at night after they've closed up. They have the time now to look at what they might need for inventory, and now we have given them a way to actually just generate those orders more easily. And so the continued work of segmentation and building out how this tool has generated new business and reorder patterns. We can monitor pretty much everything: demographics, types of reorder activity, where we can lift sales, where we want to put some extra attention on particular titles that we know are building momentum in the market, and we want all of those smaller retailers to know about them. So it's a Shopify platform. I don't know if I mentioned that, but that has been it was a project to get it up off the ground, and also work with our distributor Hachette to make sure the feeds work smoothly, but since then it has really been managed by our web team and in a very kind of streamlined and efficient manner. So that is something that I encourage everybody to think about. How do we meet our buyers where they are, often not during the times when they can meet with reps in stores. And then the other thing to highlight is we are pretty well invested now in the Microsoft suite, beginning with Teams. We needed that solution for all of our hybrid work, online meetings, chat, things like that. But we have since also really embraced the SharePoint tools that come with the Microsoft suite, enabling us to have just a web-based shared intranet, uploading and accessing information as needed, being able to edit real time. The other area that we're very focused on is converting most of our sales analysis, publishing analysis, P&L management to the Power BI system that is Microsoft's now really big platform for that kind of work. There is a lot of AI powered opportunities within Power BI that we're starting to build some understanding of. We're still early days, but even without that next level, the ability to really have a more visual and simplified and efficient way of getting at our data, whether it's to look at how are we tracking on our spring 2026 acquisitions? What kind of revenue do we have in the pipeline? How do we look at it by type or category, editor, number of titles they've acquired, things like that, that we can do quickly. Also, just P&L management. How does that live P&L look now that we're in the market versus the assumptions we made originally? So, and then really the other area is demand planning within that Power BI system, uploading our sell-through, looking at, we integrate all the book scan information so that we really have a sense of not just what should that forecast look like, but also how is sell-through continuing and what does that mean for inventory planning. So those are some highlights that I thought would be helpful to share, particularly in that sales and analytics side of the business.
Okay, great. All right. Before I turn it over, I'm sure we got a lot of questions in the chat area. And a lot of them are asking for names of tools, Nicole. So I'm sort of assuming that we can get those to the people later on, and we don't have to all necessarily address them in the Q&A here. Is that
I was going to
Nicole?
ask about that. Should we drop it in the chat for everybody? Is there a way of doing that too?
You can just send the information to me and we'll share that out along with the rest of the webinar assets that'll be going out hopefully early next week.
Okay. All right. I don't want to
Thank
guess. It's really great that everybody interested in all these tools, but I don't want to kind of bog us down and that sort of thing. So great. Thanks a lot. All right. Tyrrell, the first question, a couple are for you. Do you subscribe to the idea that came up at BISG that the rights sales would be even more important? And you see any tools coming down the road that'll help you manage and make these sales easier?
It's a great question. We've actually had some, our children's rights sales have continued to grow and expand over the years. The adult side has been a little more challenging for us. I do believe there's continued opportunity and really doing some deeper kind of outreach business development work in territories that we we don't have close relationships with. So that is something we are looking at. In terms of a tool, this has been, ideally we would have wanted to integrate that rights component into Salesforce, but because of how we're developing or creating contracts and the other workflow around rights, we've had to pivot, and we are working with RightZone to develop a rights database and system that can also hook into our enterprise software for our royalty management and everything else. So that has not yet been complete, but we're hopeful, and it's greatly needed for our rights team to be a little bit more sophisticated in how we're managing as well as efficient. So I'll share that info in the follow-up as well.
Okay, great. And you did mention Spotify in your presentation there. So I assume that's
Did I?
doing with the digital books, or did I have that wrong? Are you on the Spotify platform in terms of digital audio?
We are just about.
Okay.
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
Okay, because we did have a question asking what's the future of audiobooks, and I think the future is still very bullish. Hachette Book Group, one of the first big five to report, they said audio increased quite a bit in the first quarter. I have to think some of that had to do with Spotify coming into the market in late November. So I would still think that, double-digit growth is probably something that we can look forward to for this year and maybe another year or two. I know, Keith, you said you had some ideas on where audio's going.
Yeah, I think that looking to what's happened with podcasts is pretty important. Right, we've gone through a pretty big boom and bust in that market. One of the things that makes me nervous about the long-term prospects for audiobooks is what KDP has introduced, which is the virtual voice on KDP. So being able to turn any ebook into an audiobook. And I think that Amazon is poised to move towards synthetic narration. And if you have an average cost of somewhere between $2,000 and $10,000 to produce an audiobook going to zero, that is going to have massive implications for not only the amount of audiobooks that are going to flood the market, similar to what we have seen with ebooks, but it's also going to really depress the perceived value of audiobooks going forward. So I think that we need to tread carefully on audio.
Because I know Audible and Ingram, sorry, and Amazon's whole perceptive is get more audio books out there for the best. But I mean, I certainly share your concerns that it might be a flood that be kind of unregulatable, if that's even a word.
Oh, I think quality though, Jim, always, we'll find a settling point. Where I see some real opportunity is the barriers to entry for traditionally produced audio. The costs are coming down significantly, and especially for smaller mid-sized publishers or authors that don't have the budget. We're now working with a couple different companies that are offering really good professional services with real voices, but in the hundreds of dollars as opposed to the thousands of dollars. And so I think there's a leveling of the playing field where more will be able to participate, and not everybody's just going to have to run into the AI synthetic voice. And so I think if we're going to put some focus, that's really where we want to be able to allow those small and mid-sized independents room at the table for audio.
And Tyrrell, your thoughts on how Chronicle is approaching this? I know your audio is relatively small, but I think it's growing.
It's all about the right projects to put into audio for a company like ours, and we're 90% visual publishing, some of which can live and thrive on audio, and some of which just really doesn't work. But we have certainly seen demand out there that is meaningful, and we are also we initially partnered with Hachette Audio to be our distributor for about 5 years, which was great for us, great learning, a way to make the connections with the key retailers out there. And now we've been able to onboard that learning to now take on the development the production and the distribution in partnership with Ingram, actually. So it's really interesting, and it's been great to have new players come into the market as well, which has been an important part of the potential.
Right, great. And and Chronicle obviously is well known for its illustrated books. Have you seen anything AI or otherwise new tech come along that keeping the cost of producing illustrated titles, they've maybe offshoring, staying here, or just new tech developments?
We're squarely in the listen learn phase. On the production side, I'm sure there's manufacturers that we're working with that have onboarded some AI enhancements to their printing capabilities, I've no doubt. But for us here, we have a working group. We're just trying to learn without necessarily trying to lead in this area. But most of our manufacturing is in Asia, China primarily, but in other markets in the region, and we'll be continuing that for a while. So the AI question is hard for me to answer beyond just the
Right.
assumptions I have and also our own learning. Nothing,
Right.
there's no magic bullet out there that we just uncovered and now has transformed everything.
Sure. Okay, great. So Keith, we talked a little bit more about Perfect Bound, because I think we can call that a tool. I think it's really great. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more and how many people you have signing on to it so far in terms of participants on the print side and the publisher side.
Yeah. So this sort of came out of the pandemic when we were experiencing all those supply chain issues. And as an independent, it's really hard to put your faith in a brand new printer for a 10,000 copy print run. So we tended to go back to the same printers over and over again. And during the pandemic, the lines were just filled. So we came up with this idea of creating a marketplace. So it's like Airbnb or Uber, where you can go on and send your request for quote out to 50 different printers all around the world. So we have printers on all 6 continents. And our hope is that we will be able to reduce costs for publishers. We will be able to offer printers the opportunity to keep their plants running 24/7 and keep the lines busy. And we will be able to reduce the amount of distance between where a book is printed and where it is sold, because I think that is one of the largest environmental impacts that our industry has, especially printing in China and shipping back to the US. So you can go on, it's totally free for both publishers and printers. And again, with one click, you send out the RFQ to all of these printers. They've all been heavily vetted. We vet both sides very carefully. And at this point, we have 128 publishers on the platform. Chronicle Books is on there, as well as Ulysses has been using it for a year. And we've seen our black and white prices come down about 10% year over year, and our full color paperboard come down 18%. So that's at a time when prices have been going up, which has been really exciting. Our next step is we really want to dive into this relational database opportunity. So we're putting in title management, royalty and rights management, with the idea that all of this data can be married up. So your cost of goods, your sales, your inventory forecasting, and actively and in real time see what royalties you're accruing as you sell books. And I think that if we can do that as independent publishers, it's going to really transform the way that we understand our programs. We understand the margins that we're actually seeing with our books, and it'll make it a lot easier to run our companies effectively and efficiently.
Okay, great. Well, good luck with that. Kelly, we have another sort of general question here. Are these tools out here now? Will they be able to help keep retail prices down, or do you see prices still going up? It seems like there isn't a push that it would be hard to keep prices where they are in terms of book cover
Yeah, I
prices.
mean, what I can say, what we've seen from our vantage point of taking all publishers' metadata, we were really slow out of the gate at the publishing industry in general in keeping up with any level of cost of inflation. The reticence to change prices, we really, I think, missed it, and now we're playing catch up. What I will say is those that have begun to more aggressively change prices, the feedback we've gotten is, consumer elasticity is far greater than one would imagine, especially on backlist books. When a consumer is paying substantially more for everything from a car to a gallon of milk, we have tended to fret in this industry about, raising the cost of a book by $1. We've seen some publishers go, much more aggressively at it and have not had any ill effects. And so I think just again, to keep up the margins in the middle, I think one of the trends that we see on the horizon, which isn't necessarily good, is we had such a margin depletion over the last 4 or 5 years. Publishers are going to have to, publishers were the ones that were squeezed in the middle because they didn't raise their prices, yet they were paying more for everything. And so I think we're just going to have to see a more aggressive view on that. Again, I'm not calling for any change. It's really a publisher's decision on what they do to be competitive, but costs are more. And I think the consumers out there realize that the cost of books have to come up.
Okay, I'm going to violate one of my rules here about a specific question, but somebody wants to know what big data is, Kelly.
Well, so big data, we tend to look at, when we look at data, we look at it in individual views. So book scan data is a data source. Cost of printing or quoting is a data source. We have a lot of different data sources, and we tend to make singular decisions. Big data is kind of what Keith was talking about, where you pool all of the pieces together to come up with a bigger, better, broader decision. And so we're working with publishers in that way to help, our distributed clients, as an example, really understand what is the life cycle cost of a book, what is the landed cost of a book, not just simply, do I make a print decision based on a singular quote, but and that's just one example. And so big data pulls multiple sources into one source to make bigger, more strategic decisions.
Okay, great. I think that's very helpful. I don't know if this is actually a tech question per se, but we have a lot of small presses on the call. So SPD, small press distribution, I think everybody probably knows, kind of collapsed in spectacular fashion about a month or so ago. We have a question here from somebody. What are other either POD or self-distribution options? Before I turn that over to the panelists to discuss, PW ran a roundtable with the heads of IPBA, PubWest, and Independent Publishers Caucus. And one of the things that came up with this idea of creating cooperatives that get small publishers who share a lot of same interests and get together to try to, if not actually distribute the titles, at least provide marketing and other services. So, well, Keith, I guess I'll turn it over to you first. You're in that space, and then maybe Kelly, you could pick up on, I know you're not necessarily in the distribution side, but I think you have some knowledge about what's happening over there. So, Keith?
Yeah, I think this is a really tough one. It's just gotten a lot harder to get distribution for independent publishers, and it's a bit of a catch-22. If you want to get distribution, you have to be of a certain size, but in order to be of a certain size, you really need distribution. So I think that, tools like what Ingram's put together with LSI and Ingram Spark is invaluable. I hate to say it, but Amazon's KDP is unbelievably effective at selling print books. So we do put some of our deep backlist into KDP, and what we've seen is if you hit that sweet spot where it's a black and white paperback book, your margins are exactly the same as they would be if you did a 2,000 or 3,000 copy offset print run, which is pretty remarkable. Now that could change in an instant because we don't control any of that distribution. But I do think as an industry, we need to look at new models and new ways of being able to provide distribution in a way that is going to benefit both the distributor and the publisher. Because I know from the distributor perspective, it's very hard to bring on a publisher that's only doing a couple of books a year. You really need that flow of income and enough money coming in to warrant the amount of work it takes to onboard and maintain a client like that.
All right, can you give Kelly?
Yeah, I was just going to say my quick take and I thought it was a great article, Jim, not to patronize you, but it was really a great article from the group. I think it's going to be more of a patchwork, getting into the distribution business to start with it's a pennies and nickels business, right? I mean, all the margins are just so thin. So for hope that there will be an expansion of additional distributors out there, or that current distributors, like he said, will continue to grow, taking on it's just going to be very difficult. So I see more of a patchwork of opportunity for those that are looking for marketing and or greater awareness. I think associations can certainly play a greater role in co-opting some of those resources. I know IBPA, as an example, offers a lot of great discounts through their services to get engaged with marketing and making your books awareness more prevalent. And then I think, the role that Ingram plays for global distribution, ensuring that you've got visibility to the global network, whether it's through a sold relationship with our wholesale buying team, if you're a large enough publisher, but if you're not, positioning your strategy such that you can have at least a virtual opportunity for global distribution, because, that is the real key of making your book aware. Amazon KDP, it's a great business, but it's only for Amazon and KDP. And so, the rest of them, and by most accounts, Amazon is only 35% of the market. So I would say absolutely support those services that KDP can offer you. But there's 65% of sales that you're not necessarily finding if you're not fully engaged in the rest of the marketplaces.
Right. Okay, we're sort of running out of time, but I'll kind of ask one sort of existential question. We talked a lot about AI, even though we tend to try not to talk a lot about AI. But somebody has a question in here. We all know AI uses lots of energy and water. How can publishers reconcile this with their sustainability pledges? So I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but it is a concern, especially since I think sustainability, again, is becoming more into focus, at least on the manufacturing side. So, Keith, this was addressed to you, so I'll give it to you first, and if anybody else wants to chime in.
I think it's very difficult. I mean, I guess you can offset it, but if you are going to use these tools, it's going to take up a lot of energy. There has been a recent move to SMLs, so small language models, SLMs, I guess, instead of large language models, which take up a lot less energy and tend to be very specifically trained. And those models can actually function on your phone instead of having to go through a huge server. So I think that is going to be a big part of the future of AI. It's just going to be working in the background on your phone. But at this point, we have a lot of energy and environmental impact in this industry that we need to continue to work on pretty actively.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll ask both Kelly and Tyrrell to address the environmental things in general. Maybe if there's tools out there that can help offset some of this, and we'll end with that.
Well, I mean, I think Keith, you're right. There's probably subsets that we're going to feed off of in the AI work. I think this is a really much bigger question that goes to the governmental level alongside how are they regulating, understanding, kind of giving some restrictions around AI usage, for a variety of reasons that we all know about. Yeah, you go.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'll sidestep the question, Jim, and say before we start worrying about that from a sustainability standpoint, I think our industry has a lot more to worry about in the amount of books that sit in warehouses to the amount of books we're still putting on boats across the world, and the kinds of papers and inks and those kinds of things we're using. Maybe that's another PW webinar, because we probably need to focus on cleaning up our own home a little bit more on the sustainability side before we start worrying about the impact of AI. Although I'm not saying it's not important, I'm saying there's likely a lot more we could be doing from just the publishing perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a great
say that too.
Yeah,
just
right.
It would be great to really focus on the publishing side with sustainability. I know a lot of publishers have done a lot of work, including us, in how we are packaging, how we're printing, etc. So that would be a great next step.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair point. I mean, publishing control, these things we just talked about, the AI future is, like you said, Tyrrell, is beyond publishers'
bigger than us.
control.
Yeah.
At the moment. So, all right, cool. I'd like to thank our speakers once again. I think it was another really super informative webinar here by Westchester. And Nicole, is the last word yours? If not, then I guess with those, we're getting thanked. So again, thank you,
Yes,
everybody.
you are getting thanked. Thank you, Jim. And also thanks to Kelly, Keith, and Tyrrell for all your useful insights. We got tons of questions. So to all of you who didn't get your questions answered here, we will try to gather information for you and send that out as a document after the webinar. The recording will also be sent out once it's ready. I expect that to be early next week. If you could just take a couple of moments, like literally 2 minutes of your time, and just share some feedback in the 2-question survey that'll come up on your screen when you exit out of the webinar, and let us know how we're doing and if this session was helpful for you, so that we can continue to bring you more useful sessions. So with that, thank you all. And if you have any questions for Westchester, we're here to help everybody in the industry to make the editorial and workflow process go more efficiently, so that you can get your content to your customers more effectively. So if you have any questions, please reach out to us at the email address that you see on your screen. And with that, I wish you all a good afternoon. Thank you.